Chapter 13 of Greenmantle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Zachary Brewster Geiss. Greenmantle by John Buchan. Chapter 13. I Move in Good Society. I walked out of that house next morning with Blenkiron's arm in mine, a different being from the friendless creature who had looked vainly the day before for sanctuary. To begin with, I was splendidly dressed. I had a navy blue suit with square padded shoulders, a neat black bow tie, shoes with a hump at the toe, and a brown bowler. Over that I wore a greatcoat lined with wolf fur. I had a smart Malacca cane and one of Blenkiron's cigars in my mouth. Peter had been made to trim his beard, and, dressed in unassuming pepper and salt, looked with his docile eyes and quiet voice a very respectable servant. Old Blenkiron had done the job in style, for, if you'll believe it, he had brought the clothes all the way from London. I realize now why he and Sandy had been fossicking in my wardrobe. Peter's suit had been of Sandy's procuring, and it was not the fit of mine. I had no difficulty about the accent. Any man brought up in the colonies can get his tongue round American, and I flattered myself I made a very fair shape at the lingo of the Middle West. The wind had gone to the south and the snow was melting fast. There was a blue sky above Asia, and away to the north masses of white cloud drifting over the Black Sea. What had seemed the day before the dingiest of cities now took on a strange beauty, the beauty of unexpected horizons and tongues of grey water winding below cypress-studded shores. A man's temper has a lot to do with his appreciation of scenery. I felt a free man once more, and could use my eyes. That street was a jumble of every nationality on earth. There were Turkish regulars in their queer conical khaki helmets, and wild-looking levies who had no kin with Europe. There were squads of Germans in flat forage caps, staring vacantly at novel sights, and quick to salute any officer on the sidewalk. Turks in closed carriages passed, and Turks on good Arab horses, and Turks who looked as if they had come out of the Ark. But it was the rabble that caught the eye. Very wild, pinched, miserable rabble. I never in my life saw such swarms of beggars, and you walked down that street to the accompaniment of entreaties for alms in all the tongues of the Tower of Babel. Blenkiron and I behaved as if we were interested tourists. We would stop and laugh at one fellow, and give a penny to a second, passing comments in high-pitched Western voices. We went into a cafe and had a cup of coffee. A beggar came in and asked alms. Hitherto Blenkiron's purse had been closed, but now he took out some small nickels and planked 5 down on the table. The man cried down blessings and picked up 3. Blenkiron very swiftly swept the other 2 into his pocket. That seemed to me queer, and I remarked that I had never before seen a beggar who gave change. Blenkiron said nothing, and presently we moved on and came to the harbour side. There were a number of small tugs moored alongside, and 1 or 2 bigger craft, fruit boats I judged, which used to ply in the Aegean. They looked pretty well moth-eaten from disuse. We stopped at one of them and watched a fellow in a blue nightcap splicing ropes. He raised his eyes once and looked at us, and then kept on with his business. Blenkiron asked him where he came from, but he shook his head, not understanding the tongue. A Turkish policeman came up and stared at us suspiciously, till Blenkiron opened his coat as if by accident, and displayed a tiny square of ribbon, at which he saluted. Failing to make conversation with the sailor, Blenkiron flung him 3 of his black cigars. "I guess you can smoke, friend, if you can't talk," he said. The man turned and caught the 3 neatly in the air. Then, to my amazement, he tossed one of them back. The donor regarded it quizzically as it lay on the pavement. "That boy's a connoisseur of tobacco," he said. As we moved away, I saw the Turkish policeman pick it up and put it inside his cap. We returned by the long street on the crest of the hill. There was a man selling oranges on a tray, and Blenkiron stopped to look at them. I noticed that the man shuffled 15 into a cluster. Blenkiron felt the oranges, as if to see that they were sound, and pushed 2 aside. The man instantly restored them to the group, never raising his eyes. "This ain't the time of year to buy fruit," said Blankiron as we passed on. "Those oranges are rotten as medlars." We were almost on our own doorstep before I guessed the meaning of the business. "Is your morning's work finished?" I said. "Our morning's walk?" he asked innocently. "I said work." He smiled blandly. "I reckoned you'd tumble to it. Why, yes, except that I've got some figuring still to do. Give me half an hour, and I'll be at your service, Major." That afternoon, after Peter had cooked a wonderfully good luncheon, I had a heart-to-heart talk with Blankiron. "My business is to get news," he said, "and before I start on a stunt I make considerable preparations. All the time in London when I was yelping at the British government, I was busy with Sir Walter arranging things ahead. We used to meet in queer places and at all hours of the night. I fixed up a lot of connections in this city before I arrived, and especially a news service with your Foreign Office by way of Roumania and Russia. In a day or two I guess our friends will know all about our discoveries." At that I opened my eyes very wide. "Why, yes. You Britishers haven't any notion how wide awake your intelligence service is. I reckon it's easy the best of all the belligerents. You never talked about it in peacetime, and you shunned the theatrical ways of the Teuton, but you had the wires laid good and sure. I calculate there isn't much that happens in any corner of the earth that you don't know within 24 hours. I don't say your highbrows use the news well. I don't take much stock in your political push. There are a lot of silver tongues, no doubt, but it ain't oratory that is wanted in this racket. The William Jennings Bryan stunt languishes in wartime. Politics is like a chicken coop, and those inside get to behave as if their little run were all the world. But if the politicians make mistakes, it isn't from lack of good instruction to guide their steps. If I had a big proposition to handle and could have my pick of helpers, I'd plump for the Intelligence Department of the British Admiralty. Yes, sir, I'd take off my hat to your government sleuths." "Did they provide you with ready-made spies here?" I asked in astonishment. "Why, no," he said. "But they gave me the key, and I could make my own arrangements. In Germany I buried myself deep in the local atmosphere and never peeped out. That was my game, for I was looking for something in Germany itself and didn't want any foreign cross-bearings. As you know, I failed where you succeeded. But so soon as I crossed the Danube, I set about opening up my lines of communication, and I hadn't been 2 days in this metropolis before I had got my telephone exchange buzzing. Sometime I'll explain the thing to you, for it's a pretty little business. I've got the cutest cipher. No, it ain't my invention, it's your government's. Anyone, babe, imbecile, or dotard, can carry my messages. You saw some of them today. But it takes some mind to set the piece, and it takes a lot of figuring at my end to work out the results. Some day you shall hear it, for all I guess it would please you." "How do you use it?" I asked. "Well, I get early news of what is going on in this cabbage patch. Likewise, I get authentic news of the rest of Europe, and I can send a message to Mr. X in Petrograd and Mr. Y in London, or if I wish to Mr. Z in New York. What's the matter with that for a post office? I'm the best informed man in Constantinople, for old General Lyman only hears one side and mostly lies at that, and Enver prefers not to listen at all. Also, I could give them points on what is happening at their very door, for our friend Sandy is a big boss in the best-run crowd of mountebanks that ever fiddled secrets out of men's hearts. Without their help, I wouldn't have cut much ice in this city." "I want you to tell me one thing, Blankiron," I said. "I've been playing a part for the past month, and it wears my nerves to tatters. Is this job very tiring? For if it is, I doubt I may buckle up." He looked thoughtful. "I can't call our business an absolute rest cure any time. You've got to keep your eyes skinned, and there's always the risk of the little packet of dynamite going off unexpected. But as these things go, I rate this stunt as easy. We have only got to be natural. We wear our natural clothes, and talk English, and sport a Teddy Roosevelt smile, and there isn't any call for theatrical talent. Where I've found the job tight was when I had got to be natural, and my naturalness was the same brand as that of everybody round about, and all the time I had to do unnatural things. It isn't easy to be going downtown to business and taking cocktails with Mr. Carl Rosenheim, and next hour being engaged trying to blow Mr. Rosenheim's friends sky high. And it isn't easy to keep up a part which is clean outside your ordinary life. I've never tried that. My line has always been to keep to my normal personality. But you have, Major, and I guess you found it wearing." "Wearing's a mild word," I said. "But I want to know another thing. It seems to me that the line you've picked is as good as could be, but it's a cast-iron line. It commits us pretty deep, and it won't be a simple job to drop it." "Why, that's just the point I was coming to," he said. "I was going to put you wise about that very thing. When I started out, I figured on some situation like this. I argued that unless I had a very clear part with a big bluff in it, I wouldn't get the confidences which I needed. We've got to be at the heart of the show, taking a real hand and not just looking on. So I settled I would be a big engineer. There was a time when there weren't many bigger in the United States than John S. Blankiron. I talked large about what might be done in Mesopotamia in the way of washing the British down the river. Well, that talk caught on. They knew of my reputation as a hydraulic expert, and they were tickled to death to rope me in. I told them I wanted a helper, and I told them about my friend Richard Hannay, as good a German as ever supped sauerkraut, who was coming through Russia and Romania as a benevolent neutral, but when he got to Constantinople would drop his neutrality and double his benevolence. They got reports on you by wire from the States. I arranged that before I left London. So you're going to be welcomed and taken to their bosoms just like John S. was. We've both got jobs we can hold down, and now you're in these pretty clothes, you're the dead ringer of the brightest kind of American engineer. But we can't go back on our tracks. If we wanted to leave for Costanza next week, they'd be very polite, but they'd never let us. We've got to go on with this adventure and nose our way down into Mesopotamia, hoping that our luck will hold. God knows how we will get out of it, but it's no good going out to meet trouble. As I observed before, I believe in an all-wise and beneficent providence, but you've got to give him a chance." I am bound to confess the prospect staggered me. We might be let in for fighting, and worse than fighting, against our own side. I wondered if it wouldn't be better to make a bolt for it, and said so. He shook his head. "I reckon not. In the first place, we haven't finished our inquiries. We've got Greenmantle located right enough, thanks to you, but we still know mighty little about that holy man. In the second place, it won't be as bad as you think. This show lacks cohesion, sir. It is not going to last forever. I calculate that before you and I strike the site of the garden that Adam and Eve frequented, there will be a queer turn of affairs. Anyhow, it's good enough to gamble on." Then he got some sheets of paper and drew me a plan of the dispositions of the Turkish forces. I had no notion he was such a close student of war, for his exposition was as good as a staff lecture. He made out that the situation was none too bright anywhere. The troops released from Gallipoli wanted a lot of refitment, and would be slow in reaching the Transcaucasian frontier where the Russians were threatening. The army of Syria was pretty nearly a rabble under the lunatic Djemal. There wasn't the foggiest chance of a serious invasion of Egypt being undertaken. Only in Mesopotamia did things look fairly cheerful, owing to the blunders of British strategy. "And you may take it from me," he said, "that if the old Turk mobilized a total of 1,000,000 men, he has lost 40% of them already. And if I'm anything of a prophet, he's going pretty soon to lose more." He tore up the papers and enlarged on politics. "I reckon I've got the measure of the young Turks and their precious committee. Those boys aren't any good. Enver's bright enough, and for sure he's got sand. He'll stick out a fight like a Vermont game chicken, but he lacks the larger vision, sir. He doesn't understand the intricacies of the job no more than a sucking child, so the Germans play with him, till his temper goes and he bucks like a mule. Talat is a sulky dog, who wants to batter mankind with a club. Both these boys would have made good cow-punchers in the old days, and they might have got a living out west as the gunmen of a labor union. They're about the class of Jesse James or Bill the Kid, excepting that they're college-reared and can patter languages. But they haven't the organizing power to manage the Irish vote in a ward election. Their one notion is to get busy with their firearms, and people are getting tired of the black hand stunt. Their hold on the country is just the hold that a man with a Browning has over a crowd with walking sticks. The cooler heads in the committee are growing shy of them, and an old fox like David is lying low till his time comes. Now it doesn't want arguing that a gang of that kind has got to hang close together or they may hang separately. They've got no grip on the ordinary Turk, barring the fact that they are active and he is sleepy, and that they've got their guns loaded." "What about the Germans here?" I asked. Blenkiron laughed. "It is no sort of a happy family. But the young Turks know that without the German boost they'll be strung up like Haman, and the Germans can't afford to neglect an ally. Consider what would happen if Turkey got sick of the game and made a separate peace. The road would be open for Russia to the Aegean. Ferdy of Bulgaria would take his depreciated goods to the other market and not waste a day thinking about it. You'd have Romania coming in on the Allies' side. Things would look pretty black for that control of the Near East on which Germany has banked her winnings. Kaiser said that's got to be prevented at all costs, but how's it going to be done?" Blenkiron's face had become very solemn again. "It won't be done unless Germany's got a trump card to play. Her game's mighty near bust, but it's still got a chance. And that chance is a woman and an old man. I reckon our landlady has a bigger brain than Enver and Lyman. She's the real boss of the show. When I came here, I reported to her, and presently you've got to do the same. I am curious as to how she'll strike you, for I'm free to admit that she impressed me considerable." "It looks as if our job were a long way from the end," I said. "It's scarcely begun," said Blenkiron. That talk did a lot to cheer my spirits, for I realized that it was the biggest of big game we were hunting this time. I'm an economical soul, and if I'm going to be hanged, I want a good stake for my neck. Then began some varied experiences. I used to wake up in the morning wondering where I should be at night, and yet quite pleased at the uncertainty. Greenmantle became a sort of myth with me. Somehow I couldn't fix any idea in my head of what he was like. The nearest I got was a picture of an old man in a turban coming out of a bottle in a cloud of smoke, which I remembered from a child's edition of the Arabian Nights. But if he was dim, the lady was dimmer. Sometimes I thought of her as a fat old German crone, sometimes as a harsh-featured woman like a schoolmistress with thin lips and eyeglasses. But I had to fit the East into the picture, so I made her young and gave her a touch of the languid houri in a veil. I was always wanting to pump Blenkiron on the subject, but he shut up like a rat trap. He was looking for bad trouble in that direction, and was disinclined to speak about it beforehand. We led a peaceful existence. Our servants were two of Sandy's lot, for Blenkiron had very rightly cleared out the Turkish caretakers, and they worked like beavers under Peter's eye, till I reflected I had never been so well looked after in my life. I walked about the city with Blenkiron, keeping my eyes open, and speaking very civil. The third night we were bidden to dinner at Mollendorf's, so we put on our best clothes and set out in an ancient cab. Blenkiron had fetched a dress suit of mine, from which my own tailor's label had been cut and a New York one substituted. General Lyman and Metternich the ambassador had gone up the line to Nisch to meet the Kaiser, who was touring those parts, so Mollendorf was the biggest German in the city. He was a thin, foxy-faced fellow, cleverish, but monstrously vain, and he was not very popular either with the Germans or the Turks. He was polite to both of us, but I am bound to say that I got a bad fright when I entered the room, for the first man I saw was Gaudian. I doubt if he would have recognized me even in the clothes I had worn in Stumm's company, for his eyesight was wretched. As it was, I ran no risk in dress clothes with my hair brushed back and a fine American accent. I paid him high compliments as a fellow engineer, and translated part of a very technical conversation between him and Blenkiron. Gaudian was in uniform, and I liked the look of his honest face better than ever. But the great event was the sight of Enver. He was a slim fellow of Rasta's build, very foppish and precise in his dress, with a smooth oval face like a girl's, and rather fine straight black eyebrows. He spoke perfect German, and had the best kind of manners, neither pert nor overbearing. He had a pleasant trick, too, of appealing all round the table for confirmation, and so bringing everybody into the talk. Not that he spoke a great deal, but all he said was good sense, and he had a smiling way of saying it. Once or twice he ran counter to Moellendorff, and I could see there was no love lost between these two. I didn't think I wanted him as a friend. He was too cold-blooded and artificial, and I was pretty certain that I didn't want those steady black eyes as an enemy. But it was no good denying his quality. The little fellow was all cold courage, like the fine polished blue steel of a sword. I fancy I was rather a success at that dinner. For one thing, I could speak German, and so had a pull on Blenkiron. For another, I was in a good temper, and really enjoyed putting my back into my part. They talked very high-flown stuff about what they had done and were going to do, and Enver was great on Gallipoli. I remember he said that he could have destroyed the whole British army if it hadn't been for somebody's cold feet, at which Merlendorf looked daggers. They were so bitter about Britain and all her works that I gathered they were getting pretty panicky, and that made me jolly as a sandboy. I'm afraid I was not free from bitterness myself on that subject. I said things about my own country that I sometimes wake in the night and sweat to think of. Gaudian got on to the use of water power in war, and that gave me a chance. "In my country," I said, "when we want to get rid of a mountain, we wash it away. There's nothing on earth that will stand against water. Now, speaking with all respect, gentlemen, and as an absolute novice in the military art, I sometimes ask why this God-given weapon isn't more used in the present war. I haven't been to any of the fronts, but I've studied them some from maps in the newspapers. Take your German position in Flanders, where you've got the high ground. If I were a British general, I reckon I would very soon make it no sort of position." Mullendorf asked, "How?" "Why, I'd wash it away. Wash away the 14 feet of soil down to the stone. There's a heap of coal pits behind the British front where they could generate power, and I judge there's ample water supply from the rivers and canals. I'd guarantee to wash you away in 24 hours, yes, in spite of all your big guns. It beats me why the British haven't got on to this notion. They used to have some bright engineers." Enver was on the point like a knife, far quicker than Gaudian. He cross-examined me in a way that showed he knew how to approach a technical subject, though he mightn't have much technical knowledge. He was just giving me a sketch of the flooding in Mesopotamia when an aide-de-camp brought in a chit which fetched him to his feet. "I have gossiped long enough," he said. "My kind host, I must leave you. Gentlemen, all my apologies and farewells." Before he left, he asked my name and wrote it down. "This is an unhealthy city for strangers, Mr. Hannay," he said in very good English. "I have some small power of protecting a friend, and what I have is at your disposal." This with the condescension of a king promising his favour to a subject. The little fellow amused me tremendously, and rather impressed me too. I said so to Gaudian after he had left, but that decent soul didn't agree. "I do not love him," he said. "We are allies, yes, but friends, no. He is no true son of Islam, which is a noble faith, and despises liars and boasters and betrayers of their salt." This was the verdict of one honest man on this ruler in Israel. The next night I got another from Blenkiron on a greater than Enver. He had been out alone and had come back pretty late, with his face grey and drawn with pain. The food we ate, not at all bad of its kind, and the cold east wind played havoc with his dyspepsia. I can see him yet boiling milk on a spirit lamp, while Peter worked at a Primus stove to get him a hot water bottle. He was using horrid language about his inside. "My God, Major, if I were you with a sound stomach, I'd fairly conquer the world. As it is, I've got to do my work with half my mind, while the other half is dwelling in my intestines. I'm like the child in the Bible that has a fox gnawing at its vitals." He got his milk boiling and began to sip it. "I've been to see our pretty landlady," he said. "She sent for me, and I hobbled off with a grip full of plans, for she's mighty set on Mesopotamia." "Anything about Greenmantle?" I asked eagerly. "Why, no. But I have reached one conclusion. I opine that the hapless prophet has no sort of time with that lady. I opine that he will soon wish himself in paradise. For if Almighty God ever created a female devil, it's Madame von Einem." He sipped a little more milk with a grave face. "This isn't my duodenal dyspepsia, Major. It's the verdict of a ripe experience, for I have a cool and penetrating judgment, even if I've a deranged stomach. And I give it as my considered conclusion that that woman's mad and bad, but principally bad." End of chapter 13. Recording by Zachary Brewster Geiss, July 2007, Greenbelt, Maryland.
14 of Greenmantle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Missy, Guangzhou, China. Greenmantle by John Buchan. Chapter 14. The Lady of the Mantilla. Since that first night I had never clapped eyes on Sandy. He had gone clean out of the world, and Blenkiron and I waited anxiously for a word of news. Our own business was in good trim, for we were presently going east towards Mesopotamia, but unless we learned more about Greenmantle, our journey would be a grotesque failure. And learn about Greenmantle we could not, for nobody by word or deed suggested his existence, and it was impossible, of course, for us to ask questions. Our only hope was Sandy, for what we wanted to know was the prophet's whereabouts and his plans. I suggested to Blenkiron that we might do more to cultivate Frau von Einem, but he shut his jaw like a rat-trap. "There's nothing doing for us in that quarter," he said. "That's the most dangerous woman on earth, and if she got any kind of notion that we were wise about her pet schemes, I reckon you and I would very soon be in the Bosphorus." Well, this was all very well, but what was going to happen if the two of us were bundled off to Baghdad with instructions to wash away the British? Our time was getting pretty short, and I doubted if we could spin out more than 3 days more in Constantinople. I felt just as if I had felt with Stum that last night when I was about to be packed off to Cairo and saw no way of avoiding it. Even Blenkiron was getting anxious. He played patience incessantly and was disinclined to talk. I tried to find out something from the servants, but they either knew nothing or wouldn't speak. The former, I think. I kept my eyes lifting, too, as I walked about the streets, but there was no sign anywhere of the skin coats or the weird stringed instruments. The whole company of the Rosy Hours seemed to have melted into the air, and I began to wonder if they had ever existed. Anxiety made me restless, and restlessness made me want exercise. It was no good walking about the city. The weather had become foul again, and I was sick of the smells and the squalor and the flea-bitten crowds. So Blenkiron and I got horses, Turkish cavalry mounts with heads like trees, and went out through the suburbs into the open country. It was a grey, drizzling afternoon, with the beginnings of a sea fog which hid the Asiatic shores of the straits. It wasn't easy to find open ground for a gallop, for there were endless small patches of cultivation and the gardens of country houses. We kept on the high land above the sea, and when we reached a bit of downland came on squads of Turkish soldiers digging trenches. Whenever we let the horses go, we had to pull up sharp for a digging party or a stretch of barbed wire. Coils of the beastly thing were lying loose everywhere, and Blenkiron nearly took a nasty toss over one. Then we were always being stopped by sentries and having to show our passes. Still, the ride did us good and shook up our livers, and by the time we turned for home I was feeling more like a white man. We jogged back in the short winter twilight, past the wooded grounds of white villas, held up every few minutes by transport wagons and companies of soldiers. The rain had come on in real earnest, and it was 2 very bedraggled horsemen that crawled along the muddy lanes. As we passed one villa, shut in by a high white wall, a pleasant smell of wood smoke was wafted towards us, which made me sick for the burning veld. My ear, too, caught the twanging of a zither, which somehow reminded me of the afternoon in Caprasa's garden house. I pulled up and proposed to investigate, but Blenkiron very testily declined. "Zithers are as common here as fleas," he said. "You don't want to be fossicking around somebody's stables and find a horseboy entertaining his friends. They don't like visitors in this country, and you'll be asking for trouble if you go inside those walls. I guess it's some old buzzard's harem." Buzzard was his own private peculiar name for the Turk, for he said he had had as a boy a natural history book with a picture of a bird called the turkey buzzard, and couldn't get out of the habit of applying it to the Ottoman people. I wasn't convinced, so I tried to mark down the place. It seemed to be about 3 miles out from the city, at the end of a steep lane on the inland side of the hill coming from the Bosphorus. I fancied somebody of distinction lived there, for a little farther on we met a big empty motor car snorting its way up, and I had a notion that the car belonged to the walled villa. Next day Blenkiron was in grievous trouble with his dyspepsia. About midday he was compelled to lie down, and having nothing better to do, I had out the horses again and took Peter with me. It was funny to see Peter in a Turkish army saddle, riding with the long Boer stirrup and the slouch of the backveld. That afternoon was unfortunate from the start. It was not the mist and drizzle of the day before, but a stiff northern gale which blew sheets of rain in our faces and numbed our bridle hands. We took the same road, but pushed west of the trench-digging parties, and got to a shallow valley with a white village among the cypresses. Beyond that there was a very respectable road, which brought us to the top of a crest that in clear weather must have given a fine prospect. Then we turned our horses, and I shaped our course so as to strike the top of the long lane that abutted on the down. I wanted to investigate the white villa. But we hadn't gone far on our road back before we got into trouble. It arose out of a sheep-dog, a yellow mongrel brute that came at us like a thunderbolt. It took a special fancy to Peter, and bit savagely at his horse's heels, and sent it capering off the road. I should have warned him, but I did not realize what was happening till too late. For Peter, being accustomed to mongrels and Kaffir kraals, took a summary way with the pest. Since it despised his whip, he out with his pistol and put a bullet through its head. The echoes of the shot had scarcely died away when the row began. A big fellow appeared, running towards us, shouting wildly. I guessed he was the dog's owner, and proposed to pay no attention, but his cry summoned two other fellows, soldiers by the look of them, who closed in on us, unslinging their rifles as they ran. My first idea was to show them our heels, but I had no desire to be shot in the back, and they looked like men who wouldn't stop short of shooting. So we slowed down and faced them. They made as savage-looking a trio as you would want to avoid. The shepherd looked as if he had been dug up, a dirty ruffian with matted hair and a beard like a bird's nest. The two soldiers stood staring with sullen faces, fingering their guns, while the other chap raved and stormed, and kept pointing at Peter, whose mild eyes stared unwinkingly at his assailant. The mischief was that neither of us had a word of Turkish. I tried German, but it had no effect. We sat looking at them, and they stood storming at us, and it was fast getting dark. Once I turned my horse round as if to proceed, and the two soldiers jumped in front of me. They jabbered among themselves, and then one said very slowly, "He want pounds," and he held up 5 fingers. They evidently saw by the cut of our jib that we weren't Germans. "I'll be hanged if he gets a penny," I said angrily, and the conversation languished. The situation was getting serious, so I spoke a word to Peter. The soldiers had their rifles loose in their hands, and before they could lift them we had the pair covered with our pistols. "If you move," I said, "you are dead." They understood that all right, and stood stock still, while the shepherd stopped his raving, and took to muttering like a gramophone when the record is finished. "Drop your guns," I said sharply. "Quick, or we shoot." The tone, if not the words, conveyed my meaning. Still staring at us, they let the rifles slide to the ground. The next second we had forced our horses on the top of them, and the 3 were off like rabbits. I sent a shot over their heads to encourage them. Peter dismounted and tossed the guns into a bit of scrub where they would take some finding. This hold-up had wasted time. By now it was getting very dark, and we hadn't ridden a mile before it was black night. It was an annoying predicament, for I had completely lost my bearings, and at the best I had only a foggy notion of the lie of the land. The best plan seemed to be to try and get to the top of a rise, in the hope of seeing the lights of the city, but all the countryside was so pockety that it was hard to strike the right kind of rise. We had to trust to Peter's instinct. I asked him where our line lay, and he sat very still for a minute, sniffing the air. Then he pointed the direction. It wasn't what I would have taken myself, but on a point like that he was pretty near infallible. Presently we came to a long slope, which cheered me, but at the top there was no light visible anywhere, only a black void like the inside of a shell. As I stared into the gloom, it seemed to me that there were patches of deeper darkness that might be woods. "There is a house half left in front of us," said Peter. I peered till my eyes ached and saw nothing. "Well, for heaven's sake, guide me to it," I said, and with Peter in front we set off down the hill. It was a wild journey, for darkness clung as close to us as a vest. Twice we stepped into patches of bog, and once my horse saved himself by a hair from going head forward into a gravel pit. We got tangled up in strands of wire, and often found ourselves rubbing our noses against tree trunks. Several times I had to get down and make a gap in barricades of loose stones. But after a ridiculous amount of slipping and stumbling, we finally struck what seemed the level of the road, and a piece of special darkness in front, which turned out to be a high wall. I argued that all mortal walls had doors, so we set to groping along it, and presently found a gap. There was an old iron gate on broken hinges, which we easily pushed open, and found ourselves on a black path to some house. It was clearly disused, for masses of rotting leaves covered it, and by the feel of it underfoot it was grass-grown. We dismounted now, leading our horses, and after about 50 yards the path ceased and came out on a well-made carriage drive. So at least we guessed, for the place was as black as pitch. Evidently the house couldn't be far off, but in which direction I hadn't a notion. Now, I didn't want to be paying calls on any Turk at that time of day. Our job was to find where the road opened into the lane, for after that our way to Constantinople was clear. One side the lane lay, and the other the house, and it didn't seem wise to take the risk of tramping up with horses to the front door. So I told Peter to wait for me at the end of the back road, while I would prospect a bit. I turned to the right, my intention being, if I saw the light of a house, to return, and with Peter take the other direction. I walked like a blind man in that nether pit of darkness. The road seemed well kept, and the soft wet gravel muffled the sounds of my feet. Great trees overhung it, and several times I wandered into dripping bushes. And then I stopped short in my tracks, for I heard the sound of whistling. It was quite close, about 10 yards away, and the strange thing was that it was a tune I knew. About the last tune you would expect to hear in this part of the world. It was the Scots air, "Caw the O's to the Nose," which was a favourite of my father's. The whistler must have felt my presence, for the air suddenly stopped in the middle of a bar. An unbounded curiosity seized me to know who the fellow could be, so I started in and finished it myself. There was silence for a second, and then the unknown began again and stopped. Once more I chipped in and finished it. Then it seemed to me that he was coming nearer. The air in that dank tunnel was very still, and I thought I heard a light foot. I think I took a step backward. Suddenly there was a flash of an electric torch from a yard off, so quick that I could see nothing of the man who held it. Then a low voice spoke out of the darkness, a voice I knew well, and following it a hand was laid on my arm. "What the devil are you doing here, Dick?" it said, and there was something like consternation in the tone. I told him in a hectic sentence, for I was beginning to feel badly rattled myself. "You've never been in greater danger in your life," said the voice. "Great God, man, what brought you wandering here today of all days?" You can imagine that I was pretty scared, for Sandy was the last man to put a case too high, and the next second I felt worse, for he clutched my arm and dragged me in a bound to the side of the road. I could see nothing, but I felt that his head was screwed round, and mine followed suit, and there, a dozen yards off, were the acetylene lights of a big motor car. It came along very slowly, purring like a great cat, while we pressed into the bushes. The headlights seemed to spread a fan far to either side, showing the full width of the drive and its borders, and about half the height of the overarching trees. There was a figure in uniform sitting beside the chauffeur, whom I saw dimly in the reflex glow, but the body of the car was dark. It crept towards us, passed, and my mind was just getting easy again when it stopped. A switch was snapped within, and the limousine was brightly lit up. Inside I saw a woman's figure. The servant had got out and opened the door, and a voice came from within. A clear, soft voice, speaking in some tongue I didn't understand. Sandy had started forward at the sound of it, and I followed him. It would never do for me to be caught skulking in the bushes. I was so dazzled by the suddenness of the glare that at first I blinked and saw nothing. Then my eyes cleared, and I found myself looking at the inside of a car upholstered in some soft dove-coloured fabric, and beautifully finished off in ivory and silver. The woman who sat in it had a mantilla of black lace over her head and shoulders, and with one slender jewelled hand she kept its fold over the greater part of her face. I saw only a pair of pale grey-blue eyes, these and the slim fingers. I remember that Sandy was standing very upright with his hands on his hips, by no means like a servant in the presence of his mistress. He was a fine figure of a man at all times, but in those wild clothes, with his head thrown back and his dark brows drawn below his skull-cap, he looked like some savage king out of an older world. He was speaking Turkish, and glancing at me now and then as if angry and perplexed. I took the hint that he was not supposed to know any other tongue, and that he was asking who the devil I might be. Then they both looked at me, Sandy with the slow, unwinking stare of the gypsy, the lady with those curious, beautiful, pale eyes. They ran over my clothes, my brand-new riding breeches, my splashed boots, my wide-brimmed hat. I took off the last and made my best bow. "Madam," I said, "I have to ask pardon for trespassing in your garden. The fact is, I and my servant, he's down the road with the horses, and I guess you noticed him. The two of us went for a ride this afternoon, and got good and well lost. We came in by your back gate, and I was prospecting for your front door to find someone to direct us, when I bumped into this brigand chief who didn't understand my talk. I'm American, and I'm here on a big government proposition. I hate to trouble you, but if you'd send a man to show us how to strike the city, I'd be very much in your debt." Her eyes never left my face. "Will you come into the car?" she said in English. "At the house I will give you a servant to direct you." She drew in the skirts of her fur cloak to make room for me, and in my muddy boots and sopping clothes I took the seat she pointed out. She said a word in Turkish to Sandy, switched off the light, and the car moved on. Women had never come much in my way, and I knew about as much of their ways as I knew about the Chinese language. All my life I had lived with men only, and rather a rough crowd at that. When I made my pile and came home, I looked to see a little society, but I had first the business of the Black Stone on my hands, and then the war, so my education languished. I had never been in a motor car with a lady before, and I felt like a fish on a dry sandbank. The soft cushions and the subtle scents filled me with acute uneasiness. I wasn't thinking now about Sandy's grave words, or about Blenkiron's warning, or about my job and the part this woman must play in it. I was thinking only that I felt mortally shy. The darkness made it worse. I was sure that my companion was looking at me all the time and laughing at me for a clown. The car stopped, and a tall servant opened the door. The lady was over the threshold before I was at the step. I followed her heavily, the wet squelching from my field boots. At that moment I noticed she was very tall. She led me through a long corridor to a room where two pillars held lamps in the shape of torches. The place was dark but for their glow, and it was as warm as a hothouse from invisible stoves. I felt soft carpets underfoot, and on the walls hung some tapestry or rug of an amazingly intricate geometrical pattern, but with every strand as rich as jewels. There, between the pillars, she turned and faced me. Her furs were thrown back, and the black mantilla had slipped down to her shoulders. "I have heard of you," she said. "You are called Richard Hannay, the American. Why have you come to this land?" "To have a share in the campaign," I said. "I'm an engineer, and I thought I could help out with some business like Mesopotamia." "You are on Germany's side?" she asked. "Why, yes," I replied. "We Americans are supposed to be neutrals, and that means we're free to choose any side we fancy. I'm for the Kaiser." Her cool eyes searched me, but not in suspicion. I could see she wasn't troubling with the question whether I was speaking the truth. She was sizing me up as a man. I cannot describe that calm, appraising look. There was no sex in it, nothing even of that implicit sympathy with which one human being explores the existence of another. I was a chattel, a thing infinitely removed from intimacy. Even so, I have myself looked at a horse which I thought of buying, scanning his shoulders and hocks and paces. Even so must the old lords of Constantinople have looked at the slaves which the chances of war brought to their markets, assessing their usefulness for some task or other, with no thought of the humanity common to purchased and purchaser. And yet, not quite. This woman's eyes were weighing me, not for any special duty, but for my essential qualities. I felt that I was under the scrutiny of one who was a connoisseur in human nature. I see I have written that I knew nothing about women, but every man has in his bones a consciousness of sex. I was shy and perturbed, but horribly fascinated. This slim woman, poised exquisitely like some statue between the pillared lights, with her fair cloud of hair, her long delicate face, and her pale bright eyes, had the glamour of a wild dream. I hated her instinctively, hated her intensely, but I longed to arouse her interest. To be valued coldly by those eyes was an offence to my manhood, and I felt antagonism rising within me. I'm a strong fellow, well set up, and rather above the average height, and my irritation stiffened me from heel to crown. I flung my head back and gave her cool glance for cool glance, pride against pride. Once, I remember, a doctor on board ship, who dabbled in hypnotism, told me that I was the most unsympathetic person he had ever struck. He said I was about as good a mesmeric subject as Table Mountain. Suddenly I began to realize that this woman was trying to cast some spell over me. The eyes grew large and luminous, and I was conscious for just an instant of some will battling to subject mine. I was aware, too, in the same moment, of a strange scent which recalled that wild hour in Caprasso's garden house. It passed quickly, and for a second her eyes drooped. I seemed to read in them failure, and yet a kind of satisfaction, too, as if they had found more in me than they expected. "What life have you led?" the soft voice was saying. I was able to answer quite naturally, rather to my surprise. "I have been a mining engineer up and down the world." "You have faced danger many times?" "I have faced danger." "You have fought with men in battles?" "I have fought in battles." Her bosom rose and fell in a kind of sigh. A smile, a very beautiful thing, flitted over her face. She gave me her hand. "The horses are at the door now," she said, "and your servant is with them. One of my people will guide you to the city." She turned away and passed out of the circle of light into the darkness beyond. Peter and I jogged home in the rain, with one of Sandy's skin-clad companions loping at our side. We did not speak a word, for my thoughts were running like hounds on the track of the past hours. I had seen the mysterious Hilda von Einem, and had spoken to her, and had held her hand. She had insulted me with the subtlest of insults, and yet I was not angry. Suddenly the game I was playing became invested with a tremendous solemnity. My old antagonists, Sturm and Rasta and the whole German Empire, seemed to shrink into the background, leaving only the slim woman with her inscrutable smile and devouring eyes. Mad and bad, Blenkiron had called her, but principally bad. I did not think they were the proper terms, for they belonged to the narrow world of our common experience. This was something beyond and above it, as a cyclone or an earthquake is outside the decent routine of nature. Mad and bad she might be, but she was also great. Before we arrived, our guide had plucked my knee and spoken some words which he had obviously got by heart. "The master says," ran the message, "expect him at midnight." End of chapter 14.
Chapter 15 of Greenmantle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Greenmantle by John Buchan. Chapter 15. An Embarrassed Toilet. I was soaked to the bone, and while Peter set off to look for dinner, I went to my room to change. I had a rub-down and then got into pyjamas for some dumbbell exercises with 2 chairs, for that long wet ride had stiffened my arm and shoulder muscles. They were a vulgar suit of primitive blue, which Blenkiron had looted from my London wardrobe. As Cornelius Brant, I had sported a flannel nightgown. My bedroom opened off the sitting room, and while I was busy with my gymnastics, I heard the door open. I thought at first it was Blenkiron, but the briskness of the tread was unlike his measured gait. I had left the light burning there, and the visitor, whoever he was, had made himself at home. I slipped on a green dressing-gown Blenkiron had lent me, and sallied forth to investigate. My friend Rasta was standing by the table, on which he had laid an envelope. He looked round at my entrance and saluted. "I come from the Minister of War, sir," he said, "and bring you the passports for tomorrow. You will travel by—" and then his voice trailed away, and his black eyes narrowed to slits. He had seen something which switched him off the metals. At that moment I saw it too. There was a mirror on the wall behind him, and as I faced him I could not help seeing my reflection. It was the exact image of the engineer on the Danube boat, blue jeans, loden coat, and all. The accursed mischance of my costume had given him the clue to an identity which was otherwise buried deep in the Bosporus. I am bound to say for Rasta that he was a man of quick action. In a trice he had whipped round to the other side of the table between me and the door, where he stood regarding me wickedly. By this time I was at the table, and stretched out a hand for the envelope. My one hope was nonchalance. "Sit down, sir," I said, "and have a drink. It's a filthy night to move about in." "Thank you, no, Herr Brandt," he said. "You may burn these passports, for they will not be used." "Whatever's the matter with you?" I cried. "You've mistaken the house, my lad. I'm called Hannay, Richard Hannay, and my partner's Mr. John S. Blenkiron. He'll be here presently. Never knew anyone of the name of Brandt, barring a tobacconist in Denver City." "You've never been to Rustchuk," he said with a sneer. "Not that I know of, but pardon me, sir, if I may ask your name and your business here. I'm darned if I'm accustomed to be called by Dutch names or have my word doubted. In my country we consider that impolite as between gentlemen." I could see that my bluff was having its effect. His stare began to waver, and when he next spoke it was in a more civil tone. "I will ask pardon if I'm mistaken, sir, but you're the image of a man who a week ago was at Rustchuk, a man much wanted by the Imperial Government." "A week ago I was tossing in a dirty little hooker coming from Constanza. Unless Rustchuk's in the middle of the Black Sea, I've never visited the township. I guess you're barking up the wrong tree. Come to think of it, I was expecting passports. Say, do you come from Enver Damad?" "I have that honour," he said. "Well, Enver's a very good friend of mine. He's the brightest citizen I've struck this side of the Atlantic." The man was calming down, and in another minute his suspicions would have been gone. But at that moment, by the crookedest kind of luck, Peter entered with a tray of dishes. He did not notice Rasta, and walked straight to the table and plumped down his burden on it. The Turk had stepped aside at his entrance, and I saw by the look in his eyes that his suspicions had become a certainty. For Peter, stripped to shirt and breeches, was the identical shabby little companion of the Rustchuk meeting. I never doubted Rasta's pluck. He jumped for the door and had a pistol out in a trice pointed at my head. "Bonne fortune!" he cried. "Both the birds at one shot!" His hand was on the latch and his mouth was open to cry. I guessed there was an orderly waiting on the stairs. He had what you call the strategic advantage, for he was at the door while I was at the other end of the table, and Peter at the side of it at least 2 yards from him. The road was clear before him, and neither of us was armed. I made a despairing step forward, not knowing what I meant to do, for I saw no light, but Peter was before me. He had never let go of the tray, and now, as a boy skims a stone on a pond, he skimmed it with its contents at Rasta's head. The man was opening the door with one hand while he kept me covered with the other, and he got the contrivance fairly in the face. A pistol shot cracked out, and the bullet went through the tray, but the noise was drowned in the crash of glasses and crockery. The next second Peter had wrenched the pistol from Rasta's hand and had gripped his throat. A dandified young Turk, brought up in Paris and finished in Berlin, may be as brave as a lion, but he cannot stand in a rough and tumble against a backveld hunter, though more than double his age. There was no need for me to help him. Peter had his own way, learned in a wild school, of knocking the sense out of a foe. He gagged him scientifically, and trussed him up with his own belt and 2 straps from a trunk in my bedroom. "This man is too dangerous to let go," he said, as if his procedure were the most ordinary thing in the world. "He will be quiet now till we have time to make a plan." At that moment there came a knocking at the door. That is the sort of thing that happens in melodrama, just when the villain has finished off his job neatly. The correct thing to do is pale to the teeth, and with a rolling, conscience-stricken eye glare round the horizon. But that was not Peter's way. "We'd better tidy up if we're to have visitors," he said calmly. Now, there was one of those big oak German cupboards against the wall, which must have been brought in sections, for complete it would never have got through the door. It was empty now but for Blenkiron's hat box. In it he deposited the unconscious Rasta, and turned the key. "There's enough ventilation through the top," he observed, "to keep the air good." Then he opened the door. A magnificent kavass in blue and silver stood outside. He saluted, and proffered a card on which was written in pencil, "Hilda von Einem." I would have begged for time to change my clothes, but the lady was behind him. I saw the black mantilla and the rich sable furs. Peter vanished through my bedroom, and I was left to receive my guest in a room littered with broken glass and a senseless man in the cupboard. There are some situations so crazily extravagant that they key up the spirit to meet them. I was almost laughing when that stately lady stepped over my threshold. "Madam," I said, with a bow that shamed my old dressing gown and strident pyjamas, "you find me at a disadvantage. I came home soaking from my ride, and was in the act of changing. My servant has just upset a tray of crockery, and I fear this room's no fit place for a lady. Allow me 3 minutes to make myself presentable." She inclined her head gravely, and took a seat by the fire. I went into my bedroom, and, as I expected, found Peter lurking by the other door. In a hectic sentence I bade him get Rasta's orderly out of the place on any pretext, and tell him his master would return later. Then I hurried into decent garments, and came out to find my visitor in a brown study. At the sound of my entrance she started from her dream, and stood up on the hearthrug, slipping the long robe of fur from her slim body. "We are alone?" she asked. "We will not be disturbed?" Then an inspiration came to me. I remembered that Frau von Einem, according to Blenkiron, did not see eye to eye with the young Turks, and I had a queer instinct that Rasta could not be to her liking. So I spoke the truth. "I must tell you that there's another guest here tonight. I reckon he's feeling pretty uncomfortable. At present he's trussed up on a shelf in that cupboard." She did not trouble to look around. "Is he dead?" she asked calmly. "By no means," I said, "but he's fixed so he can't speak, and I guess he can't hear much." "He was the man who brought you this?" she asked, pointing to the envelope on the table which bore the big blue stamp of the Ministry of War. "The same," I said. "I'm not perfectly sure of his name, but I think they call him Rasta." Not a flicker of a smile crossed her face, but I had a feeling that the news pleased her. "Did he thwart you?" she asked. "Why, yes, he thwarted me some. His head is a bit swelled, and an hour or two on the shelf will do him good." "He is a powerful man," she said, "a jackal of Anvers. You have made a dangerous enemy." "I don't value him at 2 cents," said I, though I thought grimly that as far as I could see, the value of him was likely to be about the price on my neck. "Perhaps you are right," she said with serious eyes. "In these days no enemy is dangerous to a bold man. I have come tonight, Mr. Hannay, to talk business with you, as they say in your country. I have heard well of you, and today I have seen you. I may have need of you, and you assuredly will have need of me." She broke off, and again her strange, potent eyes fell on my face. They were like a burning searchlight which showed up every cranny and crack of the soul. I felt it was going to be horribly difficult to act a part under that compelling gaze. She could not mesmerize me, but she could strip me of my fancy dress and set me naked in the masquerade. "What came you forth to seek?" she asked. "You are not like that stout American blank iron, a lover of shoddy power and a devotee of feeble science. There is something more than that in your face. You are on our side, but you are not of the Germans with their hankerings for a Rococo empire. You come from America, the land of pious follies, where men worship gold and words." I asked, "What came you forth to seek?" As she spoke, I seemed to get a vision of a figure, like one of the old gods looking down on human nature from a great height, a figure disdainful and passionless, but with its own magnificence. It kindled my imagination, and I answered with the stuff I had often cogitated when I had tried to explain to myself just how a case could be made out against the Allied cause. "I will tell you, madam," I said. "I am a man who has followed a science, but I have followed it in wild places, and I have gone through it and come out at the other side. The world, as I see it, had become too easy and cushioned. Men had forgotten their manhood and soft speech, and imagined that the rules of their smug civilization were the laws of the universe. But that is not the teaching of science, and it is not the teaching of life. We have forgotten the greater virtues, and we were becoming emasculated humbugs whose gods were our own weaknesses. Then came war, and the air was cleared. Germany, in spite of her blunders and grossness, stood forth as the scourge of cant. She had the courage to cut through the bonds of humbug and to laugh at the fetishes of the herd. Therefore I am on Germany's side. But I came here for another reason. I know nothing of the East, but as I read history it is from the desert that the purification comes. When mankind is smothered with shams and phrases and painted idols, a wind blows out of the wild to cleanse and simplify life. The world needs space and fresh air. The civilization we have boasted of is a toy ship and a blind alley, and I hanker for the open country." This confounded nonsense was well received. Her pale eyes had the cold light of the fanatic. With her bright hair and the long, exquisite oval of her face, she looked like some destroying fury of a Norse legend. At that moment I think I first really feared her. Before I had half hated and half admired. Thank heaven, in her absorption, she did not notice that I had forgotten the speech of Cleveland, Ohio. "You are the household of faith," she said. "You will presently learn many things, for the faith marches to victory. Meanwhile I have one word for you. You and your companion travel eastward." "We go to Mesopotamia," I said. "I reckon these are our passports," and I pointed to the envelope. She picked it up, opened it, and then tore it in pieces and tossed it in the fire. "The orders are countermanded," she said. "I have need of you, and you go with me. Not to the flats of the Tigris, but to the great hills. Tomorrow you will receive new passports." She gave me her hand and turned to go. At the threshold she paused, and looked towards the oak cupboard. "Tomorrow I will relieve you of your prisoner. He will be safer in my hands." She left me in a condition of pretty blank bewilderment. We were to be tied to the chariot wheels of this fury, and started on an enterprise compared to which fighting against our friends at Kut seemed tame and reasonable. On the other hand, I had been spotted by Rasta, and had got the envoy of the most powerful man in Constantinople locked in a cupboard. At all costs we had to keep Rasta safe, but I was very determined that he should not be handed over to the lady. I was going to be no party to cold-blooded murder, which I judged to be her expedient. It was a pretty kettle of fish, but in the meantime I must have food, for I had eaten nothing for 9 hours. So I went in search of Peter. I had scarcely begun my long-deferred meal when Sandy entered. He was before his time, and he looked as solemn as a sick owl. I seized on him as a drowning man clutches a spar. He heard my story of Rasta with a lengthening face. "That's bad," he said. "You say he spotted you, and your subsequent doings of course would not disillusion him. It's an infernal nuisance, but there's only one way out of it. I must put him in charge of my own people. They will keep him safe and sound till he's wanted. Only he mustn't see me." And he went out in a hurry. I fetched Rasta from his prison. He had come to his senses by this time, and lay regarding me with stony, malevolent eyes. "I'm very sorry, sir," I said, "for what has happened, but you left me no alternative. I've got a big job on hand, and I can't have it interfered with by you or anyone. You're paying the price of a suspicious nature. When you know a little more, you'll want to apologize to me. I'm going to see that you are kept quiet and comfortable for a day or two. You've no cause to worry, for you'll suffer no harm. I give you my word of honor as an American citizen." 2 of Sandy's miscreants came in and bore him off, and presently Sandy himself returned. When I asked where he was being taken, Sandy said he didn't know. "They've got their orders, and they'll carry them out to the letter. There's a big unknown area in Constantinople to hide a man, into which the cafetiere never enter." Then he flung himself into a chair and lit his old pipe. "Dick," he said, "this job is getting very difficult and very dark, but my knowledge has grown in the last few days. I found out the meaning of the second word that Harry Bullivant scribbled." "Cancer?" I asked. "Yes. It means just what it reads and no more. Greenmantle is dying, has been dying for several months. This afternoon they brought a German doctor to see him, and the man gave him a few hours of life. By now he may be dead." This news was a staggerer. For a moment I thought it cleared up things. "Then that busts the show," I said. "You can't have a crusade without a prophet." "I wish I thought it did. It's the end of one stage, but the start of a new and blacker one. Do you think that woman will be beaten by such a small thing as the death of her prophet? She'll find a substitute. One of the 4 ministers, or someone else. She's a devil incarnate, but she has the soul of a Napoleon. The big danger is only beginning." Then he told me the story of his recent doings. He had found out the house of Frau von Einem without much trouble, and had performed with his ragamuffins in the servants' quarters. The prophet had a large retinue, and the fame of his minstrels, for the companions were known far and wide in the land of Islam, came speedily to the ears of the holy ones. Sandy, a leader in this most orthodox coterie, was taken into favour and brought to the notice of the 4 ministers. He and his half-dozen retainers became inmates of the villa, and Sandy, from his knowledge of Islamic lore and his ostentatious piety, was admitted to the confidence of the household. Frau von Einem welcomed him as an ally, for the companions had been the most devoted propagandists of the new revelation. As he described it, it was a strange business. Greenmantle was dying, and often in great pain, but he struggled to meet the demands of his protectress. The 4 ministers, as Sandy saw them, were unworldly ascetics. The prophet himself was a saint, though a practical saint with some notions of policy, but the controlling brain and will were those of the lady. Sandy seemed to have won his favour, even his affection. He spoke of him with a kind of desperate pity. "I never saw such a man. He is the greatest gentleman you can picture, with a dignity like a high mountain. He's a dreamer and a poet too, a genius if I can judge these things. I think I can assess him rightly, for I know something of the soul of the East, but it would be too long a story to tell now. The West knows nothing of the true Oriental. It pictures him as lapped in colour and idleness and luxury and gorgeous dreams. But it is all wrong. The calf he yearns for is an austere thing. It is the austerity of the East that is its beauty and its terror. It always wants the same things at the back of its head. The Turk and the Arab came out of big spaces, and they have the desire of them in their bones. They settle down and stagnate, and by they degenerate into that appalling subtlety which is their ruling passion gone crooked. And then comes a new revelation and a great simplifying. They want to live face to face with God without a screen of ritual and images and priestcraft. They want to prune life of its foolish fringes and get back to the noble bareness of the desert. Remember, it is always the empty desert and the empty sky that cast their spell over them. These and the hot, strong, antiseptic sunlight which burns up all rot and decay. It isn't inhuman. It's the humanity of one part of the human race. It isn't ours. It isn't as good as ours, but it's jolly good all the same. There are times when it grips me so hard that I'm inclined to forswear the gods of my fathers. Well, Greenmantle is the prophet of this great simplicity. He speaks straight to the heart of Islam, and it's an honourable message. But for our sins it's been twisted into part of that damned German propaganda. His unworldliness has been used for a cunning political move, and his creed of space and simplicity for the furtherance of the last word in human degeneracy. My God, Dick, it's like seeing St. Francis run by Messalina. The woman has been here tonight, I said. She asked me what I stood for, and I invented some infernal nonsense which she approved of. But I can see one thing. She and her prophet may run for different stakes, but it's the same course. Sandy started. She's been here? He cried. Tell me, Dick, what do you think of her? I thought she was about 2 parts mad, but the third part was uncommon like inspiration. That's about right, he said. I was wrong in comparing her to Messalina. She's something a dash sight more complicated. She runs the prophet just because she shares his belief. Only what in him is sane and fine, in her is mad and horrible. You see, Germany also wants to simplify life. I know, I said. I told her that an hour ago, when I talked more rot to the second than any normal man ever achieved. It will come between me and my sleep for the rest of my days. Germany's simplicity is that of the neurotic, not the primitive. It is megalomania and egotism and the pride of the man in the Bible that waxed fat and kicked. But the results are the same. She wants to destroy and simplify, but it isn't the simplicity of the ascetic, which is of the spirit, but the simplicity of the madman that grinds down all the contrivances of a civilization to a featureless monotony. The prophet wants to save the souls of his people. Germany wants to rule the inanimate corpse of the world. But you can get the same language to cover both. And so you have the partnership of St. Francis and Messalina. Dick, did you ever hear of a thing called the Superman? There was a time when the papers were full of nothing else, I answered. I gather it was invented by a sportsman called Nietzsche. Maybe, said Sandy. Old Nietzsche has been blamed for a great deal of rubbish he would have died rather than acknowledge. But it's a craze of the new fatted Germany. It's a fancy type which could never really exist, any more than the economic man of the politicians. Mankind has a sense of humour which stops short of the final absurdity. There never has been, and there never could be a real Superman. But there might be a Superwoman. You'll get into trouble, my lad, if you talk like that, I said. It's true, all the same. Women have got a perilous logic which we never have, and some of the best of them don't see the joke of life like the ordinary man. They can be far greater than men, for they can go straight to the heart of things. There never was a man so near the divine as Joan of Arc. But I think, too, they can be more entirely damnable than anything that ever was breached, for they don't stop still now and then and laugh at themselves. There is no Superman. The poor old donkeys that fancy themselves in the part are either crack-brained professors who couldn't rule a Sunday school class, or bristling soldiers with pint-pot heads who imagine that the shooting of a Duc d'Enghien made a Napoleon. But there is a Superwoman, and her name's Hilda van Einem. I thought our job was nearly over, I groaned, and now it looks as if it hadn't well started. Bullivant said that all we had to do was to find out the truth. Bullivant didn't know. No man knows except you and me. I tell you, the woman has immense power. The Germans have trusted her with their trump card, and she's going to play it for all she is worth. There's no crime that will stand in her way. She has set the ball rolling, and if need be she'll cut all her prophets' throats and run the show herself. I don't know about your job, for honestly I can't quite see what you and Blank Iron are going to do, but I'm very clear about my own duty. She's let me into the business, and I'm going to stick to it in the hope that I'll find a chance of wrecking it. We're moving eastward tomorrow, with a new prophet if the old one is dead. Where are you going? I asked. I don't know, but I gather it's a long journey, judging by the preparations, and it must be to a cold country, judging by the clothes provided. Well, wherever it is, we're going with you. You haven't heard the end of our yarn. Blank Iron and I have been moving in the best circles as skilled American engineers who are going to play Old Harry with the British on the Tigris. I'm a pal of Enver's now, and he has offered me his protection. The lamented Rasta brought our passports for the journey to Mesopotamia tomorrow, but an hour ago your lady tore them up and put them in the fire. We are going with her, and she vouchsafed the information that it was toward the Great Hills. Sandy whistled long and low. I wonder what the deuce she wants with you. This thing is getting dashed complicated, Dick. Where, more by token, is Blank Iron? He's the fellow to know about high politics. The missing Blank Iron, as Sandy spoke, entered the room with his slow, quiet step. I could see by his carriage that for once he had no dyspepsia, and by his eyes that he was excited. "Say, boys," he said, "I've got something pretty considerable in the way of news. There's been big fighting on the eastern border, and the buzzards have taken a bad knock." His hands were full of papers, from which he selected a map and spread it on the table. "They keep mum about this thing in the capital, but I've been piecing the story together these last days, and I think I've got it straight. A fortnight ago, old man Nicholas descended from his mountains and scuppered his enemies there, at Cuprecu, where the main road eastward crosses the Araxes. That was only the beginning of the stunt, for he pressed on a broad front, and a gentleman called Kiamil, who commands in those parts, was not up to the job of holding him. The buzzards were shepherded in from north and east and south, and now the Muscovite is sitting down outside the forts of Erzurum. I can tell you they're pretty miserable about the situation in the highest quarters. Enver is sweating blood to get fresh divisions to Erzurum from Gallipoli, but it's a long road, and it looks as if they would be too late for the fair. You and I, Major, start for Mesopotamia tomorrow, and that's about the meanest bit of bad luck that ever happened to John S. We're missing the chance of seeing the goriest fight of this campaign." I picked up the map and pocketed it. Maps were my business, and I had been looking for one. "We are not going to Mesopotamia," I said. "Our orders have been cancelled." "But I've just seen Enver, and he said he had sent round our passports." "They're in the fire," I said. "The right ones will come along tomorrow morning." Sandy broke in, his eyes bright with excitement. "The great hills! We're going to Erzurum! Don't you see that the Germans are playing their big card? They're sending Greenmantle to the point of danger in the hope that his coming will rally the Turkish defence. Things are beginning to move, Dick, old man. No more kick in the heels for us. We're going to be in it up to the neck, and heaven help the best man. I must be off now, for I've got a lot to do. Au revoir. We meet some time in the hills." Blankiron still looked puzzled till I told him the story of that night's doings. As he listened, all the satisfaction went out of his face, and that funny, childish air of bewilderment crept in. "It's not for me to complain, for it's in the straight line of our duty, but I reckon there's going to be big trouble ahead of this caravan. It's kismet, and we've got to bow. But I won't pretend that I'm not considerable scared at the prospect." "Oh, so am I," said. "The woman frightens me into fits. We're up against it this time, all right. All the same, I'm glad we're to be let into the real star metropolitan performance. I didn't relish the idea of touring the provinces." "I guess that's correct. But I could wish that the good Lord would see fit to take that lovely lady to himself. She's too much for a quiet man at my time of life. When she invites us to go in on the ground floor, I feel like taking the elevator to the roof garden." End of chapter 15.
Of Greenmantle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Missy, Guangzhou, China. Greenmantle by John Buchan. Chapter 16. The Battered Caravanserai. 2 days later, in the evening, we came to Angora, the first stage in our journey. The passports had arrived next morning, as Frau von Einem had promised, and with them a plan of our journey. Moore, one of the companions, who spoke a little English, was detailed to accompany us, a wise precaution, for no one of us had a word of Turkish. These were the sum of our instructions. I heard nothing more of Sandy or Greenmantle or the lady. We were meant to travel in our own party. We had the railway to Angora, a very comfortable German Schlafwagen tacked to the end of a troop train. There wasn't much to be seen of the country, for after we left the Bosporus we ran into scuds of snow, and except that we seemed to be climbing onto a big plateau, I had no notion of the landscape. It was a marvel that we made such good time, for that line was congested beyond anything I have ever seen. The place was crawling with the Gallipoli troops, and every siding was packed with supply trucks. When we stopped, which we did on average about once an hour, you could see vast camps on both sides of the line, and often we struck regiments on the march along the railway track. They looked a fine, hardy lot of ruffians, but many were deplorably ragged, and I didn't think much of their boots. I wondered how they would do the 500 miles of road to Erzurum. Blankiron played patience, and Peter and I took a hand at piquet, but mostly we smoked and yarned. Getting away from that infernal city had cheered us wonderfully. Now we were out on the open road, moving to the sound of the guns. At the worst, we should not perish like rats in a sewer. We would be all together, too, and that was a comfort. I think we felt the relief which a man who has been on a lonely outpost feels when he is brought back to his battalion. Besides, the thing had gone clean beyond our power to direct. It was no good planning and scheming, for none of us had a notion what the next step might be. We were fatalists now, believing in kismet, and that is a comfortable faith. All but Blenkiron. The coming of Hilda von Einum into the business had put a very ugly complexion on it for him. It was curious to see how she affected the different members of our gang. Peter did not care a rush. Man, woman, and hippogriff were the same to him. He met it all as calmly as if he were making plans to round up an old lion in a patch of bush, taking the facts as they came and working at them as if they were a sum of arithmetic. Sandy and I were impressed. It's no good denying it. Horribly impressed. But we were too interested to be scared. And we weren't a bit fascinated. We hated her too much for that. But she fairly struck Blenkiron dumb. He said himself it was just like a rattlesnake and a bird. I made him talk about her, for if he sat and brooded he would get worse. It was a strange thing that this man, the most imperturbable, and I think about the most courageous I have ever met, should be paralyzed by a slim woman. There was no doubt about it. The thought of her made the future to him as black as a thundercloud. It took the power out of his joints, and if she was going to be much around, it looked as if Blenkiron might be counted out. I suggested that he was in love with her, but this he vehemently denied. "No, sir, I haven't got no sort of affection for the lady. My trouble is that she puts me out of countenance, and I can't fit her in as an antagonist. I guess we Americans haven't got the right poise for dealing with that kind of female. We've exalted our women folk into little tin gods, and at the same time left them out of the real business of life. Consequently, when we strike one playing the biggest kind of man's game, we can't place her. We aren't used to regarding them as anything except angels and children. I wish I had had you boys' upbringing." Angora was like my notion of some place such as Amiens in the retreat from Mons. It was one mass of troops and transport. The neck of the bottle, for more arrived every hour, and the only outlet was the single eastern road. The town was pandemonium, into which distracted German officers were trying to introduce some order. They didn't worry much about us, for the heart of Anatolia wasn't a likely hunting ground for suspicious characters. We took our passport to the commandant, who visaed them readily, and told us he'd do his best to get us transport. We spent the night in a sort of hotel, where all four crowded into one little bedroom, and next morning I had my work cut out getting a motor car. It took 4 hours, and the use of every great name in the Turkish Empire, to raise a dingy sort of Studebaker, and another 2 to get the petrol and spare tires. As for a chauffeur, love or money couldn't find him, and I was compelled to drive the thing myself. We left just after midday, and swung out into bare, bleak downs patched with scrubby woodlands. There was no snow here, but a wind was blowing from the east, which searched the marrow. Presently we climbed up into hills, and the road, though not badly engineered to begin with, grew as rough as the channel of a stream. No wonder, for the traffic was like what one saw on that awful stretch between Kassel and Ypres, and there were no gangs of Belgian road-makers to mend it up. We found troops by the thousands, striding along with their impassive Turkish faces, ox convoys, mule convoys, wagons drawn by sturdy little Anatolian horses, and, coming in the contrary direction, many shabby Red Crescent cars and wagons of the wounded. We had to crawl for hours on end, till we got past a block. Just before the darkening, we seemed to outstrip the first press, and had a clear run for about 10 miles over a low pass in the hills. I began to get anxious about the car, for it was a poor one at the best, and the road was guaranteed sooner or later to knock even a Rolls-Royce into scrap iron. All the same, it was glorious to be out in the open again. Peter's face wore a new look, and he sniffed the bitter air like a stag. There floated up from little wayside camps the odour of wood smoke and dung fires. That, and the curious acrid winter smell of great wind-blown spaces, will always come to my memory as I think of that day. Every hour brought me peace of mind and resolution. I felt as I had felt when the battalion first marched from Aire towards the firing line, a kind of keying up and wild expectation. I'm not used to cities, and lounging about Constantinople had slackened my fibre. Now, as the sharp wind buffeted us, I felt braced to any kind of risk. We were on the great road to the east and the border hills, and soon we should stand upon the farthest battle-front of the war. This was no commonplace intelligence job. That was all over, and we were going into the firing zone, going to take part in what might be the downfall of our enemies. I didn't reflect that we were among those enemies, and would probably share their downfall if we were not shot earlier. The truth is, I had got out of the way of regarding the thing as a struggle between armies and nations. I hardly bothered to think where my sympathies lay. First and foremost, it was a contest between the four of us and a crazy woman, and this personal antagonism made the strife of armies only a dimly felt background. We slept that night like logs on the floor of a dirty khan, and started next morning in a powder of snow. We were getting very high up now, and it was perishing cold. The companion, his name sounded like Hussein, had travelled the road before and told me what the places were, but they conveyed nothing to me. All morning we wriggled through a big lot of troops, a brigade at least, who swung along at a great pace with a fine free stride that I don't think I have ever seen bettered. I must say I took a fancy to the Turkish fighting man. I remembered the testimonial that our fellows gave him as a clean fighter, and I felt very bitter that Germany should have lugged him into this dirty business. They halted for a meal, and we stopped too, and lunched off some brown bread and dried figs, and a flask of very sour wine. I had a few words with one of the officers who spoke a little German. He told me they were marching straight for Russia, since there had been a great Turkish victory in the Caucasus. "We have beaten the French and the British, and now it is Russia's turn," he said stolidly, as if repeating a lesson, but he added that he was mortally sick of war. In the afternoon we cleared the column and had an open road for some hours. The land now had a tilt eastward, as if we were moving towards the valley of a great river. Soon we began to meet little parties of men coming from the east, with a new look in their faces. The first lots of wounded had been the ordinary thing you see on every front, and there had been some pretense at organization, but these new lots were very weary and broken. They were often barefoot, and they seemed to have lost their transport and to be starving. You would find a group stretched by the roadside in the last stages of exhaustion. Then would come a party limping along, so tired that they never turned their heads to look at us. Almost all were wounded, some badly, and most were horribly thin. I wondered how my Turkish friend behind would explain the sight to his men, if he believed in a great victory. They had not the air of the backwash of a conquering army. Even Blenkiron, who was no soldier, noticed it. "These boys look mighty bad," he observed. "We've got to hustle, Major, if we're going to get seats for the last act." That was my own feeling. The sight made me mad to get on faster, for I saw that big things were happening in the east. I had reckoned that 4 days would take us from Angora to Erzurum, but here it was the second nearly over, and we were not yet a third of the way. I pressed on recklessly, and that hurry was our undoing. I have said that the Studebaker was a rotten old car. Its steering gear was pretty dicky, and the bad surface and continual hairpin bends of the road didn't improve it. Soon we came into snow lying fairly deep, frozen hard and rutted by the big transport wagons. We bumped and bounced horribly, and were shaken about like peas in a bladder. I began to be acutely anxious about the old bone shaker, the more as we seemed a long way short of the village I had proposed to spend the night in. Twilight was falling, and we were still in an unfeatured waste, crossing the shallow glen of a stream. There was a bridge at the bottom of a slope, a bridge of logs and earth which had apparently been freshly strengthened for heavy traffic. As we approached it at a good pace, the car ceased to answer to the wheel. I struggled desperately to keep it straight, but it swerved to the left, and we plunged over a bank into a marshy hollow. There was a sickening bump as we struck the lower ground, and the whole party were shot out into the frozen slush. I don't yet know how I escaped, for the car turned over, and by rights I should have had my back broken. But no one was hurt. Peter was laughing, and Blenkiron, after shaking the snow out of his hair, joined him. For myself, I was feverishly examining the machine. It was about as ugly as it could be, for the front axle was broken. Here was a piece of hopeless bad luck. We were stuck in the middle of Asia Minor, with no means of conveyance, for to get a new axle there was as likely as to find snowballs on the Congo. It was all but dark, and there was no time to lose. I got out the petrol tins and spare tires, and cached them among the rocks on the hillside. Then we collected our scanty baggage from the derelict Studebaker. Our only hope was Hussein. He had got to find us some lodging for the night, and next day we would have a try for horses or a lift in some passing wagon. I had no hope of another car. Every automobile in Anatolia would now be at a premium. It was so disgusting a mishap that we all took it quietly. It was too bad to be helped by hard swearing. Hussein and Peter set off on different sides of the road to prospect for a house, and Blenkiron and I sheltered under the nearest rock and smoked savagely. Hussein was the first to strike oil. He came back in 20 minutes with news of some kind of dwelling a couple of miles up the stream. He went off to collect Peter, and, humping our baggage, Blenkiron and I plodded up the waterside. Darkness had fallen thick by this time, and we took some bad tosses among the bogs. When Hussein and Peter overtook us, they found a better road, and presently we saw a light twinkle in the hollow ahead. It proved to be a wretched, tumble-down farm in a grove of poplars, a foul-smelling, muddy yard, a 2-roomed hovel of a house, and a barn which was tolerably dry, and which we selected for our sleeping place. The owner was a broken old fellow whose sons were all at the war, and he received us with the profound calm of one who expects nothing but unpleasantness from life. By this time we had recovered our tempers, and I was trying hard to put my new Kismet philosophy into practice. I reckoned that if risks were foreordained, so were difficulties, and both must be taken as part of the day's work. With the remains of our provisions and some curdled milk, we satisfied our hunger and curled ourselves up among the pease straw of the barn. Blenkiron announced with a happy sigh that he had now been for 2 days quit of his dyspepsia. That night, I remember, I had a queer dream. I seemed to be in a wild place among mountains, and I was being hunted, though who was after me I couldn't tell. I remember sweating with fright, for I seemed to be quite alone, and the terror that was pursuing me was more than human. The place was horribly quiet and still, and there was deep snow lying everywhere, so that each step I took was heavy as lead. A very ordinary sort of nightmare, you will say? Yes, but there was one strange feature in this one. The night was pitch dark, but ahead of me, in the throat of the pass, there was one patch of light, and it showed a rum little hill with a rocky top, what we call in South Africa a castrol or saucepan. I had a notion that if I could get to that castrol I should be safe, and I panted through the drifts towards it with the avenger of blood at my heels. I woke gasping to find the winter morning struggling through the cracked rafters, and to hear Blenkiron say cheerily that his duodenum had behaved all night like a gentleman. I lay still for a bit, trying to fix the dream, but it all dissolved into haze, except the picture of the little hill, which was quite clear in every detail. I told myself it was a reminiscence of the veldt, some spot down in the Wackerstrom country, though for the life of me I couldn't place it. I pass over the next 3 days, for they were one uninterrupted series of heartbreaks. Hussein and Peter scoured the country for horses, Blenkiron sat in the barn and played patience, while I haunted the roadside near the bridge in the hope of picking up some kind of conveyance. My task was perfectly futile. The columns passed, casting wondering eyes on the wrecked car among the frozen rushes, but they could offer no help. My friend the Turkish officer promised to wire to Angora from some place or other for a fresh car, but, remembering the state of affairs at Angora, I had no hope from that quarter. Cars passed, plenty of them, packed with staff officers, Turkish and German, but they were in far too big a hurry to even stop and speak. The only conclusion I reached from my roadside vigil was that things were getting very warm in the neighbourhood of Erzurum. Everybody on that road seemed to be in mad haste either to get there or to get away. Hussein was the best chance, for, as I have said, the companions had a very special and peculiar graft throughout the Turkish Empire. But the first day he came back empty-handed. All the horses had been commandeered for the war, he said, and though he was certain that some had been kept back and hidden away, he could not get on their track. The second day he returned with 2 miserable screws, and deplorably short in the wind from a diet of beans. There was no decent corn or hay left in the countryside. The third day he picked up a nice little Arab stallion, in poor condition, it is true, but perfectly sound. For these beasts we paid good money, for Blenkiron was well supplied, and we had no time to spare for the interminable Oriental bargaining. Hussein said he had cleaned up the countryside, and I believed him. I dared not delay another day, even though it meant leaving him behind, but he had no notion of doing anything of the kind. He was a good runner, he said, and could keep up with such horses as ours forever. If this was the manner of our progress, I reckoned we would be weeks in getting to Erzurum. We started at dawn on the morning of the 4th day, after the old farmer had blessed us and sold us some stale rye bread. Blenkiron bestrode the Arab, being the heaviest, and Peter and I had the screws. My worst forebodings were soon realized, and Hussein, loping along at my side, had an easy job to keep up with us. We were about as slow as an ox wagon. The brutes were unshod, and with the rough roads I saw that their feet would very soon go to pieces. We jogged along like a tinker's caravan, about 5 miles to the hour, as feckless a party as ever disgraced a high road. The weather was now a drizzle, which increased my depression. Cars passed us and disappeared in the mist, going at 30 miles an hour to mock our slowness. None of us spoke, for the futility of the business clogged our spirits. I bit hard on my lip to curb my restlessness, and I think I would have sold my soul there and then for anything that could move fast. I don't know any sorer trial than to be mad for speed and to have to crawl at a snail's pace. I was getting ripe for any kind of desperate venture. About midday we descended on a wide plain full of the marks of rich cultivation. Villages became frequent, and the land was studded with olive groves and scarred with water furrows. From what I remembered of the map, I judged that we were coming to that champagne country near Siwas, which is the granary of Turkey and the home of the true Osmanli stock. Then at the corner of the road we came to the caravanserai. It was a dingy, battered place, with the pink plaster falling in patches from its walls. There was a courtyard abutting on the road, and a flat-topped house with a big hole in its side. It was a long way from any battleground, and I guessed that some explosion had wrought the damage. Behind it, a few hundred yards off, a detachment of cavalry were encamped beside a stream, with their horses tied up in long lines of pickets. And by the roadside, quite alone and deserted, stood a large, new motor car. In all the road before and behind there was no man to be seen except the troops by the stream. The owners, whoever they were, must be inside the caravanserai. I have said I was in the mood for some desperate deed, and lo and behold, Providence had given me the chance. I coveted that car as I have never coveted anything on earth. At the moment all my plans had narrowed down to a feverish passion to get to the battlefield. We had to find Greenmantle at Erzurum, and once we were there we should have Hilda von Einem's protection. It was a time of war, and a front of brass was the surest safety. But indeed I could not figure out any plan worth speaking of. I saw only one thing: a fast car which might be ours. I said a word to the others, and we dismounted and tethered our horses at the near end of the courtyard. I heard the low hum of voices from the cavalrymen by the stream, but they were 300 yards off and could not see us. Peter was sent forward to scout in the courtyard. In the building itself there was but one window looking on the road, and that was in the upper floor. Meantime, I crawled along beside the wall to where the car stood and had a look at it. It was a splendid 6-cylinder affair, brand new, with the tires little worn. There were 7 tins of petrol stacked behind, as well as spare tires, and looking in, I saw map cases and field glasses strewn on the seats as if the owners had only got out for a minute to stretch their legs. Peter came back and reported that the courtyard was empty. There were men in the upper room, he said, more than one, for I heard their voices. They are moving about restlessly and may soon be coming out. I reckoned that there was no time to be lost, so I told the others to slip down the road 50 yards beyond the caravanserai and be ready to climb in as I passed. I had to start the infernal thing, and there might be shooting. I waited by the car till I saw them reach the right distance. I could hear voices from the second floor of the house, and footsteps moving up and down. I was in a fever of anxiety, for any moment a man might come to the window. Then I flung myself on the starting handle and worked like a demon. The cold made the job difficult, and my heart was in my mouth, for the noise in that quiet place must have woke the dead. Then, by the mercy of heaven, the engine started, and I sprang to the driving seat, released the clutch, and opened the throttle. The great car shot forward, and I seemed to hear behind me shrill voices. A pistol bullet bored through my hat, and another buried itself in a cushion beside me. In a second I was clear of the place, and the rest of the party were embarking. Blenkiron got on the step and rolled himself like a sack of coals into the tonneau. Peter nipped up beside me, and Hussein scrambled in from the back over the folds of the hood. We had our baggage in our pockets and had nothing to carry. Bullets dropped round us, but did no harm. Then I heard a report at my ear, and out of a corner of my eye saw Peter lower his pistol. Presently we were out of range, and looking back I saw 3 men gesticulating in the middle of the road. "May the devil fly away with this pistol," said Peter ruefully. "I never could make good shooting with a little gun. Had I had my rifle! "What did you shoot for?" I asked in amazement. "We've got the fellow's car, and we don't want to do them any harm." "It would have saved trouble had I had my rifle," said Peter quietly. "The little man you call Rasta was there, and he knew you. I heard him cry your name. He is an angry little man, and I observed that on this road there is a telegraph." End of chapter 16.